Me tonight. We're going to base tonight, or I'm going to bring to everyone's attention a scripture in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse number 5, which says, "For this they willfully forget." And that obviously the Apostle Peter is referring here to a predominant philosophy that would emerge in the last days, in which it would be based on a denial of Noah's flood. And people willfully forget that. And what that means is they purposely don't want anything to do with it. And I find that to be true about the American Revolution. People don't really want the truth. A lot of people just like the secularized, sanitized version of the American Revolution, which does not include God. And it's really a tragedy, because you will never understand American history. You'll never be excited about American history unless you involve God, because we wouldn't have a United States of America today except for God's intervention over and over and over again. And that's not just my words. That's the words of those that lived it, those that fought the American Revolution. They're the ones that wrote about it. They're the ones that called the days of fasting and prayer. And so, again, we're just trying to bring about the whole truth here. Not just a bunch of historical facts, but bringing in the writings of the original people that actually lived it, because that's the only way you're really going to know. That would be like, for us as Christians, that would be like trying to present Christianity without referring to the Bible. In other words, it was the people that lived it, both Old and New Testament, that's who we go to learn. And so the same should be today for the study of the American Revolution. It should be an exercise of digging deep into the writings of those that lived it to find out how they interpreted events, because that's the only way you get the truth. Not from some, quote, scholar from the 1940s or the 2010s that writes just a persuasion that they might have, because it might not be a persuasion at all. It might simply be their point of view, which eliminates God. So tonight we want to start, just a reminder that last week we discussed the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey. It was on June 28th, 1778. We're going to go a year further now. We're going to start in 1779. And during this period of time, 1779, 1780, into 1781, you're going to find George Washington is going to be camped outside of New York City. He will be dealing with diplomatic issues, and then he will be dealing with some issues that are pressing upon keeping the colonies basically together. He will also be dealing with some Indian uprisings, meaning the Indians that are being subscripted by the British to fight against the Americans, namely like the Iroquois Nation, and they will send out parties to diffuse their ability to cause mayhem within the American Revolutionary Army. So he will be preoccupied. And what will happen during this time is the battles, the warfare, are going to become part of what is called the Southern Campaign. It's going to move out of Pennsylvania, where we've been, out of New Jersey. To the most part, we have a couple battles that will occur there, and then out of New York, and everything is going to move down to North and South Carolina. That's where going to be the motor of the American Revolution at this point. And this is as we get towards the end of the American Revolution. We're going to talk about two things tonight. We're going to talk about Benedict Arnold and the true story of what transpired there and the role his wife had to play in that. Because a lot of what people don't understand about the story of Benedict Arnold is that a lot of what happened during his life was not yet the truth of it was not yet known. It would take till the 1930s when historians would be allowed to examine writings from the American Revolution, namely the writings or papers of General Henry Clinton, that we will discover what I shared on Sunday, that the missus, in this case, speaking of Peggy Shippen Arnold, the wife of Benedict Arnold, played a key role in what was attempted to be the most treacherous, treasonous act in American history. And that is that they attempted to turn over both West Point and George Washington to the British Army. And the way that she would be involved is she wrote letters both to an individual we'll talk about in a minute, John Andre, but then also in Henry Clinton's papers, he has handwritten writings by Peggy Shippen Arnold, in which she used two covert ways to get her messages across. One was invisible ink. She used invisible ink, and the way that they would be able to see what she was writing is they would use either acid or matches, fire, underneath it to cause it to come to the surface. And then the second way that she did it was that she used a code. The book of the deciphering of that code was found in 1930s. And so this is information that's at hand, okay, that can be used. So we're going to get into that right now. On November 11th, 1779, the Continental Congress declared a day of prayer, which Virginia Governor Thomas Jefferson observed. Jefferson wrote. Now, one of the things we've been talking about week after week is people say, we're not a Christian nation. We're not a Christian nation. But if you ask these people, please define to me what you mean by a Christian nation, they analyze it from a position of separation of church and state and feel that even though that came about basically in the 1950s and 60s, they think that they believed that back then. They didn't. They didn't believe that at all, any separation of church and state. And they believe that we're a Christian nation. So over the last 7 weeks, I've read over and over again expressions from governors, from General Washington, from the Continental Congress, in which not only did they call for days of fasting and prayer, but they spoke of wanting this nation to diffuse Christianity throughout the world. And we'll see some of those strong statements again tonight. So when we say that the United States is a Christian nation, what we mean is that our nation was founded by individuals, vast majority were of the Christian persuasion. They weren't like in Great Britain, where they forced the church upon people. The Anglican Church was the church. Here, we've taken a more benevolent approach, the correct approach, to allow people to worship any way they want. But to believe that they didn't believe that this would remain a Christian nation goes against history. It goes against the writings and the beliefs of the founders. We'll see that again in a minute, like right now. Thomas Jefferson wrote on November 11, 1779, Congress hath thought proper to recommend to the several states a day of public and solemn thanksgiving to Almighty God for his mercies, and of prayer that he would crown our arms with victory, that he would grant to his church effusions of divine grace, and pour out his Holy Spirit on all ministers of the gospel, that he would bless and prosper the means of education, and spread the light of Christian knowledge through the remotest corners of the earth. Boom. End of argument. Thomas Jefferson, considered by some to be the most irreligious of the founding fathers, wrote specifically advancing religion, which was Christianity, spoke of the Holy Spirit, and then in terms of education, spread Christian knowledge throughout the entire earth. So how anyone could look at that statement and then try to divorce Thomas Jefferson from a belief in Christianity, it to me is just willfully forgetting. The next spring, April 6th, well, even before we get to April 6th, what was yesterday? St. Patrick's Day. Well, on March 16th, 1780, George Washington acknowledged St. Patrick's Day, and the reason he did that was twofold. They just come out of a terrible winter. Some historians say that it was worse than Valley Forge. It was at Morristown, New Jersey, and it was just terrible winter. They were again short on supplies, short on food. People were defecting. It was so miserable there, and they came through that. And seeing that the state of the emotions of the army were at such a low level, George Washington decided to acknowledge St. Patrick's Day to honor those that were of Irish descent in his army and to help those that were, emotionally drained and caught between wanting to depart and continue the war. And so what he did was, for the first time in a year, he gave them 1 day off. 1 day off. They didn't get 2 weeks, okay? They didn't get a month. They got 1 day off. Then on April 6, 1780, General George Washington issued his proclamation from Morristown, where it was such a rough winter. Quote, Congress, having been pleased to appoint a day of fasting, humiliation, and prayer, there should be no labor or recreations on that day. Then, in May of 1780, Lafayette, if you recall, since the Battle of Saratoga, because of our victory, now France is coming online. But the forces were, George Washington's forces were again being depleted because of the harsh winter at Morristown. But Lafayette showed up after going back to France, coming to meet him and saying, French troops are on their way. They're going to help replenish the American army as they go forward. Then on August 30th, 1780, American Revolution hero, General Benedict Arnold, remember he's a hero to this point, made his decision to betray America. He conspired with British Henry Clinton to surrender West Point for 20,000 pounds, which today is $1 million. So he was going to be the beneficiary of $1 million to turn over West Point, and we'll see in a few minutes, George Washington to the British. Important to note, West Point controlled the Hudson River Valley, extending from near up to Canada to at least 60 miles north of West Point. Can we show just that little map that shows the distance between West Point and New York? Yeah, that's it right there. United States Military Academy. That's West Point, and it's 60 miles. And you say, well, that's so short. How come since at this point in time and until the end of the war, the British controlled New York City? And so you wonder, why didn't they go up and take West Point? Well, twofold. The journey was not that easy, but the results were going to be worse because West Point was a highly, highly fortified. And it was positioned in a place that anyone approaching it was going to be on the lesser end of this deal, okay? And so we were able to control West Point and all through the Hudson Valley. You recall a few weeks ago we discussed when Great Britain tried to, Burgoyne tried to cut off the New England states from the other colonies, but he was not able to do that. And we controlled that area right up to the end of the war. Okay, so the betrayal of Benedict Arnold actually started much earlier than 1780. In 1777, the British recaptured Philadelphia. In just a few days, we're going to see that the Americans recaptured again. That and Fort Ticonderoga was changing sides, okay, depending on what was happening. Last week, we saw with the Battle of Monmouth, that also what was happening towards in Pennsylvania at Philadelphia was that the French's involvement now in the war, the British were concerned that the French were going to come down out of Canada and they were going to cut off the Delaware River and put the Philadelphia in a bad spot for the British. So we saw last week that notice came from Britain to Philadelphia, and they said, shut it down, don't leave any British there, get out and come to New York, okay? Again, so they have it for a while, then things change, and all of a sudden, America will take Philadelphia back. Then then the British will take it back. Then America will take it back. Same thing we've seen happen in Fort Ticonderoga. In other words, it's a very fluid American Revolution in terms of going back and forth. We saw weeks ago Henry Knox made the point. He said that, look, we're happy about this victory. I believe he's speaking of Trenton and Princeton. We're happy about the victories, but tomorrow we may lose again. So the battles are, the war is in the balance all the way through. Another reason why if God had not intervened, it could have gone the opposite way very easily. So in 1777, the British again recaptured Philadelphia. A prominent Philadelphia family with loyalist leanings. We know loyalist leanings means that they're living here in America, but they're on Britain's side. They don't want us to become our own independent country. They want us to stay as a colony of Great Britain, okay? They have loyalist leanings. Their family name is the Shippens. And they hosted a British soldier by the name of John Andre. Now, when you get later, the paper that was handed out to you, the summary on the second page, or on the first page, under point 2, it says John Arnold. That's a mistake on my part. It's actually, John Andre. Yes, it is. Huh? Where? No, I'm talking about under treachery. Point 2. It should be John Andre. Yeah, I made that mistake. Only one I've made in the last 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, let's keep going on here. So the Shippens in Philadelphia are hosted, because they're loyalists, they're hoping a British major by the name of John Andre. John Andre is going to take or enter into a relationship of talking anyway with a young lady in the family. Andre would play an important role in Arnold's treason. One of the Shippens family members that Andre met in the Shippen home was their youngest daughter, Margaret, or Peggy Shippen. And we'll go by the name Peggy from here on out because that's how she was known, Peggy Shippen. In 1778, the Americans recaptured Philadelphia. Like I said, now it's coming back to the Americans. But Arnold continued correspondence with Shippen. Then in 1778, the new Continental military commander in Philadelphia, Benedict Arnold, met with and subsequently in 1779 married Peggy Shippen. So here's the triangle we've got going now. In the Shippen family, we have Peggy Shippen, who is going to marry an American general by the name of Benedict Arnold. At the same time, she's developed a cordial relationship with John Andre of the British Army. Now we're going to find out some ingredients that are going to change the position of Benedict Arnold. Also in 1779, the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania brought 8 formal charges against Benedict Arnold for corruption and malfeasance with the money of the federal and state governments, and he was subsequently convicted on 2 relatively minor counts. But his reaction to it is as follows, quote, enraged by his treatment in Philadelphia, General Arnold resigned his command there in March 1779. Pursuant to the secret communications with the British, he sought and obtained the command of West Point, a critical American defense post in the highlands of the Hudson River, which he would be given because nobody knew yet that he was about to commit treason. General Arnold systematically weakened the defenses of West Point with the intent of making it easier for the British to capture. So now the die is cast. Okay, here we go. During this time, John Andre had become British General Henry Clinton's spy chief. With the assistance of his wife, I'm speaking of Arnold's wife, Peggy, on September 21st, 1780, Arnold met with Andre at West Point, where after the meeting, Andre left to return to the British lines dressed as a civilian. It was then that God intervened. On Monday, September 25th, Arnold received a note. I was speaking of Benedict Arnold, back at West Point where he's command chief now. Arnold received a note announcing Andre's capture with possession of the papers and maps of West Point. Arnold immediately fled, eventually securing shelter on the HMS Vulture, aptly named, on the Hudson River. In a letter to American General William Heath, General Washington explained, quote, Major General Arnold has gone to the enemy. He had had an interview with Major Andre, Adjutant General of the British Army, and had put into his possession a state of our army, of the garrison at this post. By a most providential interposition, Major Andre was taken in, returning to New York with all these papers in General Arnold's handwriting, who, hearing of the matter, kept it secret, left his quarters immediately under pretense of going over to West Point on Monday forenoon, then pushed down the river in the barge, which was not discovered till I had returned from West Point in the afternoon. During Andre's retreat to New York, he had encountered a few American militiamen whom he mistook for loyalists. Well, how could he do that? Because most of the militia did not have any kind of uniforms. They just looked like average Joe walking down the street, okay? He talked too freely. How many of you have ever heard this saying? Loose lips sink ships. So he's thinking these people he runs into are loyalists with the crown, and so he's just talking with them, okay? He talked too freely, which aroused their suspicion. Now, here's where maybe some of you can, in your own life experiences, can relate to when for some reason just something's not sitting right, okay? They searched Andre once, but something wasn't sitting right, so they searched him again twice. Then a third time, and discovered the incriminating papers in the heel of his boot. Have you ever had that experience where you just feel like something, and you just come back to it again? Now, something's not right. Now I can do it again. And all of a sudden, in this case, they found it. And maybe you've had that experience too. General Washington wrote, they were, quote, they were offered, meaning of the militiamen that caught Andre with the papers, they were offered a large sum of money for his release and as many goods as they would demand, but without effect. Their conduct gives them a just claim to the thanks of their country. End of quote. That was George Washington saying that. They arrested John Andre and marched him back to West Point to Benedict Arnold's office. As stated, Arnold, realizing his treason had been uncovered, he escaped to England on the British ship, the Vulture, and became an officer in the British Army, though he would return and fight against the Americans. Major John Andre was hanged in October 1780 in response to the earlier British hanging of 21-year-old American spy Nathan Hale. Anybody remember Nathan Hale's statement? What did Nathan Hale say about only giving up his one? Remember it? He was sad that he only had one life to lose for his country. Yeah, the key word there is to lose for his country. Nathan Hale was 21 years old, and he actually approached George Washington with the desire to go to New York City to uncover some valuable information for George Washington. Was caught there and was hanged. And so as a result of that, when Andre was caught, he was hanged by the Americans. On September 26, 1780, General Washington wrote, quote, treason of the blackest dye was yesterday discovered. General Arnold, who commanded at West Point, lost to every sentiment of honor, of public and private obligations, was about to deliver up that important post into the hands of the enemy. Such an event must have given the American cause a deadly wound, if not fatal stab. Happily, the treason has been timely discovered to prevent the fatal misfortune. The providential train of circumstances which led to its discovery offers the most convincing proof that the liberties of America are the object of divine protection. Boom, that's how George Washington interpreted it. Arnold planned to betray West Point on the very day that George Washington was going to be there to inspect it. General Washington wrote to Lieutenant Colonel John Laurens, quote, in no instance since the commencement of the war has the interposition of Providence appeared more conspicuous that in the rescue of the post and garrison of West Point from Arnold's villainous perfidy. Now I had to look up, that was a new one for me, perfidy. Perfidy simply means treason, okay? A treasonous act. The Continental Congress was so glad that this plot was stopped that they issued a day of thanksgiving on October 18, 1780. Quote, in the late remarkable interposition of his watchful providence, in the rescuing the person of our commander-in-chief and the army from imminent dangers, at the moment when treason was ripened for execution, it is therefore recommended a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to confess our unworthiness and to offer fervent supplications to the God of all grace, check this out, to cause the knowledge of Christianity to spread over all the earth. So when people will say, well, we were never a Christian, it belies their ignorance, that they historically don't understand or they've been kept from understanding. They're either willfully ignorant or they've come through an educational system in which the truth has been kept from them. Because I've read already tonight from Thomas Jefferson, from George Washington, from the Continental Congress, the spread of Christianity was on a high demand on their level. Why? Because it goes back to the covenant of 1607. That's what we're supposed to do. That's why God put us here, to share the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the world. 3 years later, Yale president Ezra Stiles stated on May 8, 1783, quote, a providential miracle detected the conspiracy of Arnold, even in the critical moment of the execution of that infernal plot, in which the body of the American army, then at West Point, with His Excellency General Washington himself, were to have been rendered into the hands of the enemy. As for Peggy Shippen Arnold, she had been, quote, dressing in anticipation of hosting a breakfast for General George Washington and his party. Possibly based on a brief discussion with her husband, she pretended hysteria in order to falsely convince George Washington and his staff that she had nothing to do with her husband's betrayal. I mean, the picture of it, she falls and they had to carry her away. You know, that my husband, how would he do such a thing? But what evidence shows is that little Peggy was not so innocent, because she used two methods to get information both to John Andre and to Henry Clinton. Number one, she wrote in her messages, she used invisible ink, which could only be read when you placed either a certain type of acid to it or from underneath with fire would it become available to be read. Okay, so secondly, she created a system of numbers that she used, which were related to letters in which she got points across, such as giving up West Point. As a matter of fact, the book for decoding was found and exists today, the book that the British used to decode her writings. And in much of the papers we'll talk about in a minute of Henry Clinton, the general from the British, when those were discovered in 1930, many of the letters are in her handwriting to the general, one of the lead generals. He occupied New York during those latter years, in control of New York. Fearing for her safety, she and her children fled to her parents' home in Philadelphia. Later, letters between her and Andre were discovered that evidenced her as complicit in the treasonous events. She was formally banished from Philadelphia and eventually made her way to England, where Arnold died in 1801, speaking of Benedict Arnold, and she in 1804. As for Benedict Arnold, quote, after fleeing to the enemy side, Arnold received a commission with the British Army and served in several minor engagements against the Americans. After the war, which ended in the victory for the Americans with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, Arnold resided in England. He died in London on June 14, 1801, at the age of 60. The British regarded him with ambivalence, while his former countrymen despised him. Following his death, Arnold's memory lived on in the land of his birth, here, where his name became synonymous with the word, quote, traitor. One final note. General Washington attempted to capture Benedict Arnold after these events. John Champe was chosen to fake desertion and join the British to accomplish his capture. This he was able to do and convince British General Clinton of his defecting. He then fortuitously met Arnold and convinced him that he, Benedict Arnold, gave him the courage to defect. Champe then planned his capture of Arnold, but on the planned day of his capture, Arnold was reassigned, and Champe never again had the opportunity to complete his orders. Postscript. In the 1930s, historians were given access to the British Sir Henry Clinton papers, as well as the millenary letter written in 1779. That's the one that was spoken of, found in Philadelphia. The results were shocking. The millenary letter, and that means containing hidden coded messages, okay? The millenary letter of 1779, Philadelphia authorities discovered a letter from Major John Andre to Peggy, which served as a millenary letter containing hidden coded messages, linking Peggy shipping Arnold directly to the treasonous correspondence. Secondly, the Clinton papers, now we're at 1930, there were coded messages. Documents in the Sir Henry Clinton papers show that Peggy passed information between Major Andre and Arnold. She often handled the coding and decoding of messages using invisible ink. Point 3, the term "the lady" in coded messages. Evidence indicates that in the coded messages, the lady passing information was identified as Peggy, who used her social network to pass intelligence without scrutiny. Fourthly, self-incriminating correspondence. Evidence shows she wrote letters to Andre with some messages, often interpreted as innocent, actually containing coded negotiations for the surrender of West Point. And she did much better than Benedict Arnold. They were ambivalent towards him, but Peggy? Following the failed plot, she was awarded an annual pension of £500 by King George III for her, quote, meritorious services, end of quote, a sum understood as compensation for her role in the espionage. Okay? So that is the true story of Benedict Arnold, his wife, Peggy, John Andre, the soldier from the British Army, Sir Henry Clinton, who was central at that point in time, lodged in New York, and how that whole process happened. And if it hadn't have been for some militiamen to not feel comfortable in talking with Andre and searching him not once, not twice, but searching him 3 times to find in his heel of his boot, then the American Revolution probably would have been over, because West Point being taken over would have allowed the British to do what Burgoyne had tried to do earlier, cut off the colonies, meaning the New England colonies, from the rest of the colonies. And without having George Washington at the lead, him in chains in Britain, it just wouldn't have happened. Let me put it that way. Okay, the second part here, I want to talk for just a few minutes on the miracles that happened resulting from the Battle of Cowpens. Now, Cowpens is what it is, a cow pen. It was a plain in which cows were kept, and then they were penned to take to market, okay? On January 17, 1781, the British and Patriot forces met at the Battle of Cowpens, South Carolina. The Southern Patriot Army had suffered devastating defeats during 1780 that left South Carolina almost completely under the control of the British. under the leadership of General Daniel Morgan. How many of you heard of Daniel Morgan? Have you seen the movie The Patriot? You know about Daniel Morgan, okay? Mel Gibson, okay? Now, the story was changed. Tarleton, a guy that we'll talk about in a minute, his name would change. But the point is it was following, this is the Battle of Cowpens in terms of in the movie. Under the leadership of General Daniel Morgan and Colonel William Washington, who was the second cousin of George Washington, the Patriots employed what would later be referred to as the tactical masterpiece of the American Revolution and lead to final victory for the American forces. The British force was led by 26-year-old Colonel Banastre Tarleton, who was nicknamed the Butcher. He received that title because of the 1780 Battle of the Waxhaws, when 300 surrendering Americans were killed by Tarleton's men. They were under the white flag of surrender, and Tarleton had them all butchered. That's how he got the name. Now, about the Battle of Cowpens, because those are the two forces. The Patriot forces against the British, Patriot under Daniel Morgan, the Tarleton ruling the British. The rolling hills of Cowpens provided a perfect setting for General Dan Morgan's plan. And let me give you a little oversight into it. Let's go to the map, if we can. Let's go to the map, and we're going to take a look. Not that one. Let's go to the next one. The next one. Yeah, now the enlarged version of it. Here's the Battle of Cowpens right here. We're just about to tell you what's going to happen, but I want this on here because it's going to go up here, and here's three things that are becoming very important. This right here is the Catawba River. That is going to be very important as soon as Cowpens is over. And then the next one, the Yadkin River, is going to become very important. And then thirdly, the Dan River is going to become very important because three miracles, 1, 2, 3, right there, are going to happen. Also, there's going to be a battle at Guilford Courthouse, which is also going to be important. But the miracles I want to really talk about specifically. The rolling hills of Cowpens provided a perfect setting for General Dan Morgan's plan. He instructed his militia, sharpshooters, to engage the enemy with 2 rounds of fire. So if you, and I chose not to show a map of this because you've got arrows and lines all over it. It's so hard to understand it unless you have an hour to decipher it. So just go with me on this. I'm going to try to paint the picture for you. You're going to have the Americans and you're going to have the British. And the Americans' plan is to induce the British to continue to chase after them, believing the British don't understand how many men the American force really is. So what he's going to do, he's going to use a threefold plan. I'm speaking of Daniel Morgan. He's going to send his sharpshooters out front. They're to fire 2 times and they're to retreat, so that the British think that they're retreating because they're afraid. They're running, okay? They're going to go over one of the little slopes, and on the other side is going to be the second unit. The first unit of sharpshooters is going to come into the second unit and get behind them and start reloading. That new unit, when the British, they're going to fire on them, okay? Then after everyone's fired on them a second time, they're all going to run, believing that the British are going to believe that this is the total of their army. They're going to go down a little slope and up over another slope where on the other side is the major part of the American force. You got me? So then the British, they're believing, are going to charge each time and not understand that they're going into a what? Yes, a trap, okay? Because what's going to happen then is when that third and second units come up to the major portion, they are going to go out from there and around a hill to attack the British from on their flank, okay? So you've got the story as I read to you here, but I want you to be able to see that as we're going through it. The rolling hills of Cowpens provided a perfect setting for General Daniel Morgan's plan. He instructed his militia sharpshooters to engage the enemy with 2 rounds of fire, aiming at the British officers and then running in retreat. Tarleton believed the sharpshooters were running scared, so he ordered his men to charge in pursuit. As the British charged over a rolling hill, the Patriot sharpshooters reached the second wave of the Patriot army, who had been waiting for the British. The sharpshooters were absorbed into the Patriot second wave, and the second wave opened fire on the British. Then, having reloaded, the sharpshooters fired again on the British. At this point, Tarleton believed this was the back end of the Patriot resistance and continued the pursuit. Then both the first and second waves retreated, and as the British came over the next hill, they saw the third and most formidable Patriot force, as well as the retreating first and second waves. At this point, Tarleton ordered his 71st Highlanders to come in from the flank. Again, the Patriot army retreated, and the British charged in hot pursuit. However, this part of the Patriot army reached a predetermined location, turned, and having reloaded as they ran, fired from nearly point-blank range, killing a large number of the British. At this point, the previous two retreating Patriot lines circled a hill and attacked the British flank, resulting in over 800 British surrendering, and the Patriots winning this decisive battle, although Tarleton escaped. Everybody got the picture? So we're going to capture 800 of their men here. And we discussed this last week. This now is becoming a battle of attrition. And this is where being on the American soil, our troops living here, is really going to sway the way this is going to turn out. Because we saw last week the supplies that were supposed to be coming from Britain didn't make it because the miraculous wind that lasted 3 months that disabled the British from getting their fleet of supplies in here. So a very similar situation is now going to happen. The troops are going to be depleted on the British side, okay? Upon hearing this defeat, General Cornwallis, who's the head, was so angry, he leaned so heavily upon his sword, it broke in two. Enraged, he determined to find and destroy General Daniel Morgan's army. Morgan, knowing Cornwallis would pursue him, quickly headed due north to join up with General Nathaniel Greene in North Carolina. So here we go. We've just fought the Battle of Cowpens. The Americans have won. They've captured those that have surrendered, but now they're on the run. And they want to get to the Catawba River because that is where they're going to meet General Greene. Okay, General Greene is going to meet him there. This will become important because by the time we get up to Guilford Courthouse, General Daniel Morgan, because of health issues, is not going to be able to be in charge of the American army. It will be Nathaniel Greene, who is very famous in this war for his, both as a tactician but also bravery. So here we go. They're running for the Catawba River to meet with General Greene. That's where we want to pick this up right now. The enraged Cornwallis left his supply wagons behind to assure he could overtake and destroy General Morgan's army. He burned his wagons and later explained. Now, when I say he later explained, he's explaining back in Britain after the war's over what happened, okay? Quote, this is now General Cornwallis speaking over there to people that are investigating him. Quote, I employed a halt of 2 days in collecting some flour and in destroying superfluous baggage and all my wagons, except those loaded with hospital stores, salt, and ammunition, and 4 reserved, empty, in readiness for sick and wounded. On Sunday, January 28th, Cornwallis' army arrived at the west bank of the Catawba River, just 2 hours after General Morgan's army crossed the river. But a sudden storm caused the river to rise and was now completely impassable. This providential intervention would prove pivotal in the success of General Morgan's retreat. But God's intervention on behalf of the American army was just beginning. The British nearly overtook the Patriot army a second time at the Yadkin River. So here we cross, And now we're going to head up here to the Yadkin, all right? And in that process, the British, as they do get across, are going to be gaining on our troops as we get to the Yadkin. The British nearly overtook the Patriot Army a second time at the Yadkin River, but yet again, a providential storm caused the river to flood, delaying the British pursuit. This was the second providential intervention, enabling Morgan's army to stay just out of the grasp of Cornwallis's troop. The race now is on towards the Dan River to be able to get into Virginia. Okay, that's where they're heading. And that's where Cornwallis has burned his wagons. He's going to catch him. He's going to drive his men day, night. It doesn't matter. He's going to catch him. The race was now onto the Dan River as a result of the third providential intervention in the form of rain and a flash flood. The Dan also rose, and the British could only look across the Dan River to see General Greene's army on the other side. The British commander, Sir Henry Clinton, wrote later in these papers over in England, check this out. Quote, this is the British commander. Here the Royal Army was, speaking at the Dan River, here the Royal Army was stopped by a sudden rise of the waters, which had only just fallen almost miraculously to let the enemy over, who could not else have eluded Lord Cornwallis's grasp, so close was he upon their rear. So even he recognized it. Even he said, man, it's like miraculous. What's happening here with all this rain and we never can quite catch them. In March of 1781, General George Washington wrote to William Gordon, quote, George Washington, we have abundant reasons to thank Providence for its many favorable interpositions in our behalf. It has at times been my only dependence, for all other resources seem to have failed us. In other words, it was just God. If it hadn't been for God, it was over. On October 20th, 1781, General Washington wrote, quote, to diffuse the general joy through every breast, the general orders divine service to be performed tomorrow in the several brigades. Troops not on duty should universally attend with that gratitude of heart which the recognition of such astonishing interposition of Providence demands. Once again, the American troops were supernaturally aided and spared from defeat. The miraculous events at the Three Rivers would lead to the against all odds victory at Yorktown and ensure the ultimate American victory. Take a look, if you would, at your paper, the summary paper. Remembering God's miracles. Week 8 summary, remember under point B, the treachery. That should be under point 2, John Andre. Okay? The Benedict Arnold treason was the most treacherous attempt in American history. 4 people were involved. Benedict Arnold, his wife Peggy Shippen Arnold, the British soldier, the major, John Andre, and the general, yeah, kind of like that, Henry Clinton. Okay. Quote, or B, the treachery. Benedict Arnold attempted to enable Great Britain to capture both West Point and General George Washington. John Andre was a British soldier who served as a go-between for the Arnolds and General Henry Clinton. The uncovering of the plot. Andre mistakenly spoke with men he presumed were loyalists but turned out to be American patriots. They discovered treasonous documents in his shoe heel. Both Arnolds escaped to England, where they eventually lived out their lives. The battles of Cowpens and the miracles of the Three Rivers. General Dan Morgan executed a brilliant battle plan at Cowpens, South Carolina. He fooled the British General Tarleton by using the hilly terrain and having his soldiers fall back 3 separate times. Each time the British mistakenly thought each small American fighting group was the last of the American force. They walked into the trap and were defeated. British General Cornwallis became livid with the result and chased the Americans in an attempt to destroy them. At each of 3 rivers, Catawba, Yadkin, and Dan, the Americans crossed over, but each time the British arrived, 3 providential rainstorms and resulting rising of the rivers kept Cornwallis from catching the Americans. Because Cornwallis had burned his wagons in order to move quickly, this blunder would lead to another miracle, the miracle of Yorktown and the end of the war. All right, before we have questions and answers, we want to say good night to those of you watching on YouTube or on Facebook. Thank you for being with us. This was week 8. We have 4 weeks to go. We invite you to tune in next time. God bless you.